Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tubeless Creek Instagram Live conversation. I am, as always, your host, Jason Haas, back after a couple of weeks. Just got back from 2 weeks in Europe, including 3 days at our partners at Beaucastel and Châteauneuf-du-Pape. If you are interested in the cool stuff that they're doing, stay tuned. I have a blog that I'm going to be publishing this week on the new building that they're building, which is just spectacular. And a lot of the other cool stuff they're working on. But my guest this week is going to be joining me from the UK. It is Amelia Singer, who is, I think, one of the best wine communicators going in the world. She's also one of the very few people to make a success of wine and TV. And she's great. I can't wait for you to meet her. But while we are waiting for people to join, as I always do, I'm going to share a few pictures of what's going on here at the vineyard. So it is definitely fall. I'll give you a couple pictures to show kind of what that looks like. You're starting to see fall colors. This is Syrah, starting to turn kind of oranges and reds. We have been getting some frosty nights. I got this picture this morning at our place. So that's the Pinot Noir vines at the Haas Vineyard in the Templeton Gap. So it's cold. It's been below freezing at night for most of the last few weeks. That's good. Everything's getting pushed into dormancy. That's normal. It is also time to really prep for winter. So we're putting down straw on all of our vineyard roads so we don't get any erosion. We are seeding. I don't know how you can see this. There's little furrows you can see in this Tanat block where we have seeded with cover crop. So as soon as we get some significant rain, that's going to sprout. And speaking of that, we got a little bit of rain earlier this week. On Monday, about 1/10 of an inch of rain. It's whatever. It's nothing significant, but at the same time, it's the beginning. It's the first rain that we've seen since April, which feels a really long time ago. In the cellar, we're basically cleaning since we pressed the last lots off this week. Now it's time to clean everything up, clean the floors, get everything is barreled down, make sure all the barrels are topped, get the equipment cleaned and put away. You can see our destemmer and our sorting table out now on the crush pad out of the winery. You can see some clean bins in the background. So all that stuff's going to get put away over the next couple days. What else? And then out, the only thing that really is still growing out there in the vineyard is olives. And we'll start our olive harvest sometime in the next few weeks. So there you go. That's what we have going on here. So I am going to stop sharing. I am going to invite Amelia to join, and then you all get to meet her, which I'm excited about. So I'm going to send an invite through now. On our test when we tried this on Monday. Magic.
Yay!
Technology is amazing when it works.
And also we did do a dress rehearsal at the beginning of the week.
We did. I have learned at this point never to assume. And I have mostly been rewarded for it, though sometimes you never know.
Exactly. Well, it's so lovely to be here. Actually, before this call, I was going back in my photo and video albums to 2014 when I think, was that the last time I saw you in real life? No. No.
Is that possible in London for one of that FMV portfolio?
Oh, you're right. I have seen you in London, but yeah, I think the first time I met you was at the winery in 2014 with my grandma. And that was such a special trip.
It does not
she
seem
ended up drinking far
possible
too much.
that could have been 10 years ago.
I know. I know. And I'm not sure if you but we were late to Saxon Winery because we were having such an amazing tasting with you. And I think Justin Smith had just got 100 points or whatever for his wines, and he was being very low profile, but would managed to get in there. And we were so late. And then my grandmother, she'd been having all my dregs from your tasting. And she was rather jolly, and we had to help her out the car. And the first thing she said to Justin, I was like, I'm so sorry, we're so late, and like being very British about it all. And then the first thing she said to Justin was, do you have anything I can eat? I'm dying. And then it ended up still being a fantastic winery tasting, and Justin took it very well. But yes, we had a wonderful time with you.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't remember that we had finished late. Sorry, Justin.
No, that was fine. It was more my grandmother having to be taken into the kitchen by his wife and given cold cuts. But
well, he probably remembers that. So I gave a very quick introduction, maybe even before you signed on, to why I'm excited to talk to you. I mean, other than that, it's always great to see you. But I think you do a remarkable job in communicating about wine, and you do it in a visual way. I mean, in addition to your work as a writer, in addition to your work through events, you're one of relatively few people who I think have made a success of wine in a video kind of TV
thank
format.
you.
And I want to get there. I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about your path, but I'd love to start at the beginning. And I think it's great that you started out talking about your grandmother, but you, from what I remember and from what I have read, you grew up with a family that was very into wine.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Well, my mom's actually sixth generation Californian, originally from Mendocino area where they had apple orchards, not vineyards. But my father is European, and he traveled a lot for work. And so he would always be bringing back interesting wine. He loves food and wine. And from basically the age of 6, I was weaned on wine. It was always just, again, I think it's quite French or Italian, just have like a sip before dinner. And then he'd say, oh, what do you taste? And when I was about 10 years old, he gave me a sip of wine, and I said, oh, I taste peach, apricot, and honey. And he almost burst into tears because he's like, oh, that's the perfect description for a Viognier. And that's kind of why actually the Rhone varietals and Viognier in particular are so important in our family, because that was like really, I didn't think I'd go into wine at that point, and I was 10, but definitely in my teenage years, when I was allowed to have a glass with dinner, and when we went traveling together as a family to Italy, and I was allowed, to try the local wines. I think that just made me and I took it for granted that wine is meant to be fun, it's meant to be accessible. No one country does it better than the other. And I think definitely in the UK 35 years ago when I was growing up, people were very conservative with what they drank. Like it was either French, maybe Italian, maybe Spanish, whereas my dad would be bringing back all these interesting wines, and then we'd always spend our summers in California, sometimes Christmas in California. So, and again, I was like, we loved wine out there too. So I think that was all part of my wine education subconsciously, just that wine is wonderful and you get wonderful wine everywhere.
Do you remember what that wine was when you were 10? It was a Viognier. Do you remember where it was from or anything?
I'm guessing it was from the Rhone. But already from our family, my dad was a huge Rhone Ranger fan, and so we loved to do Rhones against kind of US counterparts from a young age, and so yeah, I'm guessing. I need to ask him. That's a very good question, Jason. What was the wine? I'll get back to you on that.
Cool. So do you have sort of an aha moment wine where, I mean, obviously it's an amazing thing to first time recognize that you taste the flavors that
Yeah.
are not just, oh, it tastes like wine, but do you have a wine that for you was eye-opening as to the possibilities of it being something that spoke about place or spoke about history or spoke about the maker?
I think definitely for me, I would have had little bits of those kind of experiences just on holiday with my parents in Italy and trying out the local vineyard, and then really being able to appreciate. And I think I'm trying to think if there was just one or a collection. I mean, for me also, wine is so much, and it can never be quantified in a lab, but so much as, yes, it's how the wine has been made and the wine in front of me, but it's also how I'm enjoying it, who I'm enjoying it with, the settings and everything, which that emotional connection. And so I think probably for me it was, if it wasn't an Italian, kind of an Amarone with my father, in Italy, and that's actually a very special grape. But I think that was probably the first red wine I could have in Italy with my father, and I was allowed a full glass. I wasn't just allowed a sip before dinner. And that was also my grandmother's favorite style of wine. So whenever she came over from California, we'd have that in the house. So again, like it's for me, I can have like wonderful like memories and experiences, but to have the aha, I mean, now I would say like a Grüne Veltliner. That's like kind of my dad's side is part Austrian. We go to Austria every year, and we have like a kind of, we love Schloss and whenever we go skiing, whenever we have family holidays and stuff here, if I have like a Grüne Veltliner, the Tradition, which is aged in the huge casks, how the Cistercian monks used to make it, and they found the manuscripts, so they make this particular wine in that way. That for me would be like, oh wow, just the history. And then when I think back to my family history, and then when I think back to how we've now adopted it as a tradition, even though we live in England, that would probably be it. But it's hard. Like and there's been memories with filming. There's been memories of special moments in my personal life. It's difficult,
Yeah,
Jason.
I'm sorry. I know that's a hard question.
No, these are really good questions, though. I love it.
So obviously there's a big leap between knowing that you like love and appreciate wine and deciding that you want to make a career out of it. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, very haphazardly. I didn't think I went off to university to do English. I was considering Williams, where you went, but actually I ended up going to Trinity College Dublin because I thought I was going to be an actress or a writer or a jazz singer. And Trinity was known for English literature, but also two theatres. It was a very creative environment. And so I spent far more of my time acting, producing, and I helped run the Food and Drink Society too. And Dublin was at a quite interesting point during the Celtic Tiger. I was there 2005 to 2009. So it suddenly had loads of money when I was first there. And suddenly there were all these wine bars and delis and restaurants. And I was liaising with a lot of the local wine bars and wine importers to put on tastings for students. But actually lots of my friends, because it's 90% Irish, lots of them hadn't grown up with wine.
Right.
And it was like a fairly new thing. And my dad would always come over because I always really enjoyed wine with my family growing up. And again, I suddenly realized, oh, that's quite like unique in the UK actually to do that and have like alcohol lying around the house, and they're just like, help yourself. Like they would much rather know what we were drinking and you know, whatever. But it was really when I was in Dublin and I was like, I want to have a wine and cheese night. And all my friends kind of laughed at me because like when we got together, most of us were like musicians or creatives, and you go to someone's house with beer and you'd bring an instrument and you'd have like a trad session and you'd sing. And I was like, well, guys, you can still bring your instruments, but just bring a bottle of wine, bring a cheese. It could be really cheap. It could be Baby Bell. I don't care. And I set them up with, like, they would come and I did 3 wines with 3 cheeses. And if people wanted to, they could ask about why. And actually it ended up being such a success that I had to do it every single semester. People loved it so much. And that was kind of like an aha moment where I'm like, no, like really, wine's like, you have to remove your ego. If you want to be in terms of wine communicating the wine industry, you have to be able to remove your ego. And actually wine is for everyone. It's just about understanding the audience. And I still didn't think I'd go into it, but it was my last year at college, and it's that time when you go back and it's Christmas time and everyone's asking you what you're going to do with your life, and it's terrifying. And I had all these letters to send off to drama school, but my heart really wasn't in it. And I got talking to this guy at a Christmas party, and somehow we got onto the subject of wine. Don't know why. And I said, I really hate how there's such a strict dichotomy of wine. People either think of it as highly elitist, highly intellectualized subject, or they think, let's drink 3 bottles of Jacob's Creek for £10. And I was like, why can't there be this kind of middle way? And, you know, where wine can be seen as like kind of like a life enhancer, like good music, good food. And Jamie Oliver, the chef, was huge then. I mean, he's still pretty big now, but he was really huge back in 2008. And I was like, I wish I could just be like a Jamie Oliver kind of like person, like out there just empowering people and making people realize no matter what background they're from, no matter how much money they have, they can drink better and everyone can learn and have fun with it. And this guy was obviously really bored of my chat and said, well, why don't you do it then? And that was when I had a eureka. That was my biggest eureka aha moment in wine, because I literally did have a light bulb go off. And I went back and it was Christmas Eve, 2008. My dad was shaving. And I said, Daddy, I've got something to tell you. And him knowing me, put down the razor and braced himself. And I said, look, I know you would have supported me if I wanted to be an actress or a writer, but actually, I really want to work with a product which I think is fundamentally misunderstood. And I was like, I really want to work with wine. And I think actually a lot of the skills I'm learning from writing, from communicating languages, whatever. And he burst into tears of happiness, as I mentioned before, was quite emotional. And that's where I get it from. And he's like, absolutely, you know, we would have supported you if you want to be an actress, but I think this way of life will align with your professional goals, but also kind of your personal values as well. And but then, yeah, so that's how it all kind of started.
Super cool. And so you were leading wine classes and doing this out of your apartment, right? After this?
My dad is ex-McKinsey, was in private equity. So immediately he was like, right, okay, if you want to go into wine, you need to start working on your quadrant. You need to create your own MBA because no one else is out there communicating about wine. People either buy it or they sell it or they make it. There's like 5 positions in the UK where people are writing about it. But, you know, in terms of being a communicator, like that wasn't really done 15 years ago. And so my dad said, look, you have to work in wineries. You need to do all your wine exams. You need to work in different aspects of the industry for contacts, as well as just to really understand this product inside out. And also, I must admit, being a young woman, I felt like I had to learn twice as much as the guys, you know, in my 20s. Things have changed now, but definitely back then, you know, it felt like, oh no, I really need to know everything and more. So I spent the first 5 years, I did a harvest at Chateaubriand, which was awesome. And I lived in Bordeaux, and it was the 2009 vintage, which I like to say is partly amazing because I was picking. But, and then I went back to London and did my wine exams, and I thoroughly encourage everyone to do the Wine Spirit Education Trust, the WSET. And my company, I was doing marketing at that time for Menzendorf, an importer here. And then before I did my diploma, I actually really wanted to understand more about wine before doing the diploma exam, the next level up. And so I worked in a winery in Rioja, and then I worked for a winery in Chile. And then I came back and started doing my diploma, working with importers, working in events, working in shops. I think retail, you have to have that consumer experience. It's really, really important. And then as soon as I got my diploma, then I set up my business, Amelias-wine. There's a hyphen because otherwise it looks like Amelias-wine for the website. And I was like, okay, so I've done all this education and now I'm in my late 20s, and like, you know, but how can I spread the joy of wine and keep overheads low? And that was effectively doing a wine-centric supper club in my basement flat. And it was called Basement Bacchanalia. And every single week it was a different theme, and I would host and cook for 18 people, just me. And people would have an aperitif. We then go through 6, 7 wines, and then it was dinner. And for me, it was amazing because it was like, yes, it was educational, but also it was meant to be social, interactive, and people went for lots of other reasons. They went to, and it got to be a very international community, which that's what I love probably most about London. So I was having loads of Italians come, very proud about their wines, and I'd have like the Spanish come, and the Frenchies would come, you know, and then the American crowd would come because they didn't think it was weird to go to someone's basement. They were very open-minded. And that's how I got like kind of private gigs and corporate gigs. And then Jamie Oliver, who was my hero, he heard about me and was like, who is this crazy girl doing these wine-centric supper clubs in her basement? And he sent his production company over, Fresh One, and they're like, yeah, she is crazy. She's perfect for your Drinks Tube channel. So then I became the wine woman for Jamie Oliver's drinks. And then that just helped with a lot of things in terms of pitching ideas for television shows, in terms and the wine show was created, which was amazing. And I was a researcher and presenter on that. And that was super helpful, again, like being someone in their late 20s.
Right.
And wine is one of those rare things. It's like, even though I was working like in television, like wine is those things where actually age acts against you. Like the older you are, the better you are. So it's kind of trying to find that sweet spot where you have enough knowledge, you know, but you know, it came at the right time, the wine show, because I felt like I kind of got my stripes by that point.
Cool. So that must have been pretty amazing, having sort of your hero reach out to you to say, hey, like, do you want to do your thing kind of with me? Like, wait, like that's...
Well, it wasn't him. It was like someone from his production company. But I have met him several times, and they say never meet your heroes, and yet he was like the loveliest guy, would always ask me about my grandma, would notice if I had like a slight haircut. And actually, for my other grandma, I got my UK grandma, like I had a cookbook and I wanted him to sign it and his at this event, and his PA was like, oh no, he only signs his name, because I said, oh, can you say I have competition in the kitchen. I wanted him to like put it in the book for her. And what I didn't realize was he's really, really badly dyslexic. And the PA was so wonderful, because like she was trying to protect him, but then what I really respected about him was, no, I'm going to write this. And all he could manage was Amelia competition, and there were so many P's and so many T's and so many C's and a question mark. And then, but I was just like, oh my gosh, like he just allowed himself to be really vulnerable and real. And I fell in love with him even more after that.
That's so nice. It's so nice when you meet people who you admire, like from afar, and realize that like they're actually really great people. It's such a nice experience.
No, it doesn't always happen, but it's wonderful when it does.
True. So can you talk about the wine show? I'm not sure, for people who maybe don't know it. Can you explain it a little bit?
So the wine show was a show. It was basically, it's like a wine travel culture show. And what I loved about it, and why I love like being a researcher on it, and when I spoke to the producers originally, it had been the idea, because originally they were thinking of making a TV show going around rich people's cellars. And I was like, do you want to make a TV show which will appeal to like 0.05% of the population? And particularly at that point, now I think audiences are much, like, I think people would be more interested. But back then, the only really good wine television had been in like the 90s, when Oz Clarke did like the BBC Two Food and Drink program with Jilly Gordon. That's in the UK anyway. And it's like, oh, do you want to have a show where wine is very much a lens through which to see climate change and politics and food and travel? And also because one glass of wine, by the way, of course I'm drinking. Love this, the Padin Tabasson. I've been eyeing it up all week, so happy. It works for my favor doing this later. But yeah, and so the idea was born that, they very much wanted to make a relatable international wine show, where wine was very much the thread, but then we would be covering stories which would have all kinds of links to the cultural zeitgeist. And it was me and my co-presenter, who's also a wine educator, Joe Fattorini. And then to start with, we had two celebrities, Matthew Good and Matthew Reese, who are actually best friends in real life. And they also were great because Matthew Good from Downton Abbey, he loves wine but doesn't know anything about it. And Matthew Reese from The Americans would joke that he only drank whiskey before our show. So it was like kind of great, because I actually thought, in terms of like people watching, I think they could relate probably to either one, and then because like we were like the nerds, Joe and I were like the nerds, and we would travel around the world introducing them to interesting wines, and we would get in like chefs with each episode too, and talk about like one particular region which we'd be looking at and how it would pair with certain dishes. So we did 3 series, got into 105 countries, so yeah, 3 international series. And I think what I love, and I just think the team was so amazing at creating, was generally a show which, whether you knew nothing or whether you knew everything about wine, you could dip in, you could dip out. It was a magazine format, didn't matter, and there really would be something for everyone. And really did show like how dynamic and interlinked wine is to the rest of the world. It's not just this snobby elitist drink.
Yeah, and I love that, because I think in like most of the parts of the kind of European continent where wine has been just a part of regular culture for like millennia, it is sort of the drink of the people, and yet there's this idea in the UK, and it's the same in the United States, that it is not. It is this sort of elite thing that, what's more, is intimidating, that you aren't allowed to like unless you know a certain amount. And so I think the kind of idea behind the show of that you have these relatively like excited novices there to whom you are sharing this place and this knowledge is a really good lens through which to bring wine to a broader audience.
And also we had to do these kind of like Top Gear like challenges, Joe and I. So we ended up, like, the wine experts always end up making a fool of ourselves. Like, we would definitely not put on a pedestal, and luckily I do not take myself too seriously.
Yeah.
Which is good again too, because like sometimes, you know, people get these ideas of sommeliers or educators, yeah, in their ivory towers, and that was just not the case on that show at all.
Yeah, and I think it's great. So I think it's fair to say that wine has struggled with the television format. I mean, you mentioned like you have to go back to the 90s to see an example of it. And I think that continues to be true to a large extent. I'm sure you've thought about why that is, and I'm wondering what your theories are as to that.
Yeah, well, I think case in point, like I'm drinking your gorgeous wine at the moment, but one glass of wine looks like another glass of wine
Right.
on screen, right? Whereas like even with food, even if you're just doing like a basic Instagram video or a TikTok thing, like immediately people can relate to it. They, you know, like food is much more accessible, but it's just visually much more appealing, much more dynamic. And I think when you're already doing something which most people don't know that much about, looks fairly boring, and often there comes all this vocabulary too, which people find esoteric. And I think that's why it's even more important, therefore, to like focus on the story behind the wine or the people behind the wine, or like how it connects to the cultural zeitgeist. And I think some TV makes some amazing programs, and I've worked with them. I did a wine course with them for the WSET, so I got to film with them. But I think they make amazing podcasts, amazing TV content. Again, it's in a specific community, but I think the kind of quality of their production, whatever, within that community is amazing. It's also just really hard for like funding unless like you have a celebrity name to it. I haven't yet watched, but Gary Barlow, the front man from Take That, he has done a wine travel show, and the first series is set in South Africa, and I think the first episode is at a Sphere winery, and that hit this week. And I'm interested because I'm like, well, maybe they just think this is the way now. Actually, you don't need wine expert. You need like, and Gary Barlow is a charismatic, lovely guy, and he doesn't know anything about wine, but he's like open-minded. So you know, it's interesting seeing that. I think there's some very good wine podcasts out there, but again, yeah, it's that visual element, and definitely like for me, like I do a wine and culture podcast. It's really been about, I launched it when I moved back from LA. So I was like, yours. I have ideas for shows, but it's you know, the current climate now, it's just so hard, and there's like so much backlog, and it's so expensive, and that's why there's a lot of reality TV, and so very much like kind of experiment with the format. But also just because I generally love conversations with people about wine, I created a podcast called Ameliorate Through Wine, which is a kind of throwback to my supper club days, as you were talking about, because I have guests come to my house for lunch, and I pair wines to them based on their palate, personality, and personal story. And all of these guests aren't in wine; they're musicians, actors, astrologers, cooks, whatever, chef, sorry. And I didn't film the first series because I just wanted to see like, will this kind of work out? And actually the conversations then were so animated, and people were learning about it, and you were learning more about them, and it was like at my own home. And then the second series we did film feature, and for Instagram and stuff. And I think that for me, I was like, okay, no, this is actually genuine fun content. Like it's animated, it's, you know, and you can like do kind of highlight snippets and whatever. But yeah, it is hard if you want to be going around beautiful wineries and traveling around. It costs money, and normally you need like some kind of celebrity endorsement. But yeah, so I'm curious to see how Gary Barlow's will do, and I might be working on something at the moment, but that's kind of under wraps. But I think what is key with whatever you do, it can't just be like this tastes like whatever, go and buy this. Like there needs to be a reason why, and it needs to be relevant to the cultural zeitgeist. And I think you probably do need an element of certain celebrities or well-known people who don't know. So you have the layman and you have someone who knows, and yeah, you have also just like genuine relationships with people who just get on and you relate to as well. I
Cool.
hope that answers your question.
It does. That was a super interesting answer. Thank you. No, I think you're right. It's because it is not the way that a lot of wine conversations go does not make for good audience participation. So I think the story, and that's despite that, like wine regions and wineries are in general beautiful. The backdrops are amazing, the settings are
Yeah.
amazing, but the challenge is, of course, to create something with narrative interest, and
not just come across as really smug, being like, look at me in this beautiful winery drinking all the wine. Like, like that's just really annoying for everyone else.
okay. So, like the range of things that you're doing now is pretty remarkable. I mean, it involves writing, it involves hosting. You work as an ambassador for, among other places, California Wines. What you have your podcast. Like what did I miss? Like what else? What other things are you working on and trying to balance at the moment?
Well, trying to balance, exactly. Important word there. Well, it goes back to that Christmas Eve conversation I had with my father in 2008, when he's like, you need to understand the product and then you can build a company, but you need to understand, like, you need to have a quadrant, basically. Again, this is like such like McKinsey, like management speak now when I look back on it. But actually, that's essentially what I've done. Like, because I was like, okay, I'll understand the product and like, da, 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 da. And then, so always I've had, as like my North Star, I would like say it's about seeing wine as a way to bring people together and seeing seeing it, like how it connects to the cultural zeitgeist and really making that like first and foremost. And then how I've always, I guess, mixed up things up by always having like part of my business be writing, part of my business be media, part of my business to be events, and part of my business be consulting. And throughout the years, and depending on where I live, because I've lived in different places, and depending on the times of year, you lean into certain parts of the quadrant. And then definitely now, the way that communication has changed, like media used to be all television, and now it's like, no, I'm doing podcasts, or I'm consulting with people on social media and like kind of doing online campaigns, or, so those things. And now, kind of my events, they're private gigs, they're corporate gigs, but I've always believed, as I mentioned before, like kind of I do believe like wine is one of the arts, and I love to cross-pollinate wine with music and literature. And so even before I left to go to LA, like I was working with orchestras and opera houses and galleries and publishing houses, pairing wine to whatever exhibition or book or piece or whatever, to kind of get wine and that art form out to a wider audience. So I've always been interested in the variety of ways of cross-pollination and various mediums to work with that. And that's kind of just changed as technology has changed. And also what's quite fun is, as much as sometimes I find social media overwhelming, I do think it's thanks to social media why we can position wine in like a lot more unconventional ways. Like, I mean, I was always been a bit kind of goofy and weird with it, but like now I think it's like people are much more open-minded to kind of wine events, or as we talk about wine television or wine podcast, like people are, like they're actually much more engaged.
Yeah. And like, not to mention, you mentioned all those different quadrants and the different options, not to mention like we had a pandemic, which of course meant that there were all of a sudden whole swaths of ways that we were used to interacting around wine that just disappeared for a stretch. So,
well, that forced me to, I was living on my own in LA. I'd come over, I was working possibly on a show with NBC, and I'd flown over, and the week I was meant to have follow-up meetings, the pandemic hit, and I was on my own in LA in a tiny little apartment above a garage. And suddenly everything and I was in West Hollywood, which is where all the riots happened, and I can't drive.
Oh, that's it. No problem, I'm sure.
Yeah. And so I was literally just trapped there for a year. And because like no one knew how long it was going to be. And also they put up the travel ban, and I was like, had spent so long getting this O1 visa, and I was like, no, I'm going to stay here, whatever.
I believe I won't be able to get back in.
Exactly. But actually that then like forced me, because because the US are always so much more ahead of trends than the UK. And now like things have changed slightly just due to social media and things like that. But definitely, like in terms of social media trends and whatever, the US are always ahead. So I was starting to do Instagram lives way before anyone was like doing it in the UK, and suddenly I was doing online wine tastings to make money. And so actually, by being in the States and by being trapped on my own, like it taught me to pivot quickly, and it taught me well. And it also taught me when I was on my own for a year. And I know it's going to really surprise you, Jason, but I'm a bit of an extrovert and and a creative. And so suddenly it really makes you think, gosh, you know, what do I miss? And I think that it really made me think I miss just having wine in real life with someone, not over a screen, but also wine for me is like, it's the community and it's the culture. And I think that's eventually what made me decide to come back to the UK, because I was like, actually, like I do know these kind of artists and these musicians, and you know, kind of, I think people needed that cheer more than ever, that cross-pollination. But so no, the pandemic was a very formative year in lots of ways.
That leads me into one more real question that I have for you.
Real question as opposed to fake
One more
question.
real question, and then there's the normal stuff of like, how do people learn more, which is super important also. But one more real kind of substantive question,
Okay.
which is like, I'm sure you've thought about like the big question that everybody here in the States is talking about, which is how do we make sure that newer generations are as interested in wine as older generations? And I'm curious as to whether if you have thoughts on that big picture, and then also if you feel like the kind of reality on the ground or the approach is different between what you see in the States and what you see in the UK.
Interesting. Well, again, I think for me and how I got into wine and how I see how they do it in Europe, it's because I was surrounded by family members and my engagement was with wine as like good food, family time, good conversation. And that's why I really believe in these cross-pollination events, because like when I do a wine and art thing or wine and music thing or wine and literature thing or wine and food, lots of people go, maybe like they don't really care about wine, but they just go along and then they suddenly, I think if you're able to somehow make it seem relevant to them, and it's like, it's not, because I know that lots of young people don't drink because it can be for health reasons maybe, or it's just like, it's just not interesting, or they just don't have any kind of emotional maybe connection to it. I definitely think it's about kind of creating communities and creating experiences where you can like learn about it in a way which makes sense to you and your beliefs, and that, you know, and I've done like wine and spiritual tastings and stuff like that, so you know, it could be, you know, wine and yoga and all of those kind of things. But I also think I think, yeah, so I think it's about making it relevant, meeting other interesting people who you'd actually want to hang out with and be like, actually, this is a really lovely way, like I'm learning about this, but I'm also like meeting other interesting people who, you know, kind of think about the world in a similar way to me. What I'm very excited about, which we've struggled with in the past in the UK, a whole reason why lots of people really didn't grow up with wine was because we didn't have our own vineyards. And now, thanks to climate change, every cloud, or not so many clouds, that, you know, now we have a really exciting wine industry. And that means that we have vineyards all over the country, up as far north as Yorkshire, all the way out in Wales. In 10, 20 years, I'm sure we'll be seeing quite a bit in Scotland. And you also have urban wineries. So suddenly there's like quite a few in London, and like you can go for the day and you can like make your own wine. You can go hang out at a wine bar and taste wine which was made from grapes about 40 miles away in Essex or whatever. And I think, again, it's about making it tangible and relevant. And I do think wine tourism is going to become more and more of a thing in the UK too, which is super exciting. Like I think in the next 5 years, tourism is going to completely change. And when you have stuff like in our country, like the cost of living crisis and, you know, kind of like Brexit and things getting more expensive, actually drinking local and supporting local, actually, this could actually be really good for the wine industry and getting people to appreciate the culture behind it and not just seeing it as an alcoholic beverage, which is really all that had been presented to before.
Yeah,
so I think that is where we're slightly different to the US, because like we've just never had this before.
Yeah.
And that's super, super exciting. And I think now that people, you know, that everyone's wanting to eat local produce, so then it makes sense. Well, you know, it makes sense to kind of drink and support local. So I think that could appeal to younger people.
Yeah, I think the whole experiential piece of it is huge. The ability to not just have it be a bottle that you order off of a list at a restaurant or that you see on the shelf at a shop or a grocery store. The fact that you have the opportunity to create memories about a wine, where a wine is a piece of a broader memory, and whether that is something so direct as going to visit a winery, or whether it's something like you were saying,
Like a cross-pollinated event. Yeah.
we're doing an event tomorrow night with a local music festival where we're working with a classical guitarist at these individual songs with individual wines, and we're going to be down there pouring and talking about the wines and playing.
That's
and
like awesome.
Sounds like
that's like
so much fun.
That's so much fun, and I think particularly post-pandemic, people crave these authentic experiences where they learn a little bit, they have fun, it's kind of multi-sensory, and they meet other like-minded people. I think everyone's really craving that more than ever now. Yeah. And that's what gives me hope in the future, because I believe in that, like in like human nature, to kind of want to crave connection and come together and learn and enjoy things together. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Amazing. I can't think of a better note to end the conversation on. But before we go, what if people want to learn more about you, learn the things you're working on, read what you write, watch what you host or produce? How do they do that?
Oh, thank you so much. Well, my social media handle is amelias_wine, because as we mentioned before, otherwise it would be amelias-wine. And I'm pretty regular on Instagram. I also do have a YouTube channel, and then I have a website, amelias-wine, which also lets kind of people know what I'm about. And then I do have a mailing list too, and I send out about and you can subscribe to that. There's a link in my bio on Instagram, and also a link on my website. And that kind of, I do quite a lot of monthly giveaways. I also kind of, I find Instagram quite hard because I'm quite loquacious. I know that will also really be a surprise to you. So what I tend to do is I write quite a bit for Instagram, but then people who subscribe to my newsletters get more of a meaty read.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Amelia Singer, thank you so much for taking a piece out of your Wednesday evening.
Oh my gosh, this is the best. Jason, I need to get over there again. I literally was tearing up when I was going through my old footage with my grandma and I, and you were teaching us how to graft vines, and we were playing with the chickens, and we were looking at all the different Mourvedre vineyards, and I just think what you guys do is amazing. And I also love talk about how do we get people drinking wine for the future. I love how switched on you guys are. I was a big promoter of your Tavis Creek Rosé in a box, which is awesome. It is such a clever idea. It's also really smart packaging. I love all the detail, all the information. I brought it as soon as it hit the UK. I think literally hit the UK, and about a week later I got it, and I brought it to a barbecue where there's a couple of people who think they know a lot about wine. There's really, really, really fun people, and I was like, here's the box. And at first they're a bit wine box, and then everyone loved it. Everyone loved it, and also just you just did it with such integrity, and people learned a lot. I think when people can see just how much it helps with the kind of your mission on sustainability, and you make the facts really clear, this is not a gimmick, and it was just beautiful wine, and also extremely practical for a barbecue. Yeah,
that's the thing. And when people, I think, have this idea that boxes are going to be one thing, and then they actually get them and they're like, man, first of all, it stays fresh for weeks. It doesn't take up very much space. It's very lightweight. It's easy to transport. It's really nice just being able to pour myself a glass out of the fridge whenever. I mean, there's real benefits. It's not just that people need to do this because it's good for carbon footprint. I mean, there's real benefits for consumers that just really requires
light. The equivalent of carrying that much wine, it's just so practical. Do you only put the rosé into box?
Nope. We do all three colors of our Patelin. So there's actually
we don't have that red here. I don't think.
Not yet, but it has shipped. So there will be red arriving to the Wine Society before the end of the year.
my goodness. I'm going to the Wine Society lunch next week. I'm going to grill them on this. I am so excited. This is wonderful news.
Yeah.
Yay.
So no, we've done a few experiments. Also, I see Gray just commented. We did a wine earlier this summer of kind of a chillable Grenache, pale Grenache that we bottled young. Didn't bottle. We put half of it in boxes and half of it just in kegs for restaurants and wine bars. Half of it boxes that we sold just here at the winery. So we're continuing to see how we can find opportunities for the format.
Oh, well, I can't wait for that. And then I am going to California next year, so I would love to make it up to Paso Robles again.
Excellent.
Yeah, it'd be lovely to see you guys. And thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. Thank you for everything.
Speak soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. I will see all of you Tablas viewers in 2 weeks. Good evening, Amelia.
Good evening. Oh, sorry. Good morning or good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yes. Midday.